Because he is God, he is worthy of my trust and obedience. I will find rest nowhere but in his holy will. Those words carry unusual weight. When life turns dark and prayer feels unanswered, what happens when heaven seems silent? Pain does not leave, and the heart begins to wonder whether God still sees, still hears, and still cares. That question lives in more people than most will ever admit. Behind calm faces, polished routines, and ordinary conversations, many are carrying private sorrow. A diagnosis changes everything. A marriage grows cold. A child drifts farther away. Work becomes uncertain. Sleep grows lighter. Hope starts to feel expensive. In moments like these, faith can feel less like confidence and more like a trembling hand reaching into the dark. At the center of this book stands one steady truth. Delay is not abandonment. Silence is not absence. Pain is not proof that God has stepped away. Much of spiritual maturity is formed in seasons no one would willingly choose. Waiting reshapes desire. Suffering exposes what comfort once hid. Pressure reveals where trust is real and where it has only been convenient. Through all of it, God remains present, even when his presence feels hidden. Heaven may seem quiet, yet divine love has not withdrawn. A closed door may hurt, yet wisdom may still be at work behind it. Tears may fall in secret, yet none of them are wasted. Elizabeth Elliot offers a fitting example for this message. After the murder of her husband Jim Elliot in Ecuador, she did not turn from God in bitterness. Deep grief entered her life again when a second husband later died from cancer. Even so, her voice remained clear. Trust God, obey God, rest in God. That testimony matters because it was not spoken from ease. It came through loss, through surrender, and through a faith refined by fire. Such a life reminds us that suffering is never meaningless in the hands of God. These pages were written for the weary heart, the overthinking mind, and the soul trying not to collapse under the weight of unanswered questions. Peace is still possible. Clarity can return. Strength can grow in quiet places. God sees the pain. God hears the cry. What feels delayed may already be part of a deeper mercy. Chapter 1. When heaven feels silent. Is anyone in heaven listening at all? That question rises when pain stays longer than expected, when prayers begin to sound tired, and when nothing in life seems to move, no matter how many times the heart asks God for help. A silent season can shake a person more than an open struggle. At least visible trouble gives something clear to fight. Silence gives nothing to hold. Silence leaves a soul standing in the same place, looking at the same burden, carrying the same ache, and wondering whether heaven has turned away. Faith says God is near. Pain says nothing is changing. Faith says keep praying. Exhaustion asks what for. That conflict can live inside sincere believers for a long time. It does not always look dramatic. It does not always become a crisis in public. Often it becomes a private tension carried quietly through ordinary days. Morning comes, work gets done, messages are answered, meals are prepared, smiles appear at the right moments. Underneath all of that, disappointment keeps pressing on the same bruised place. A mother keeps praying for a child who is drifting farther from God and farther from wisdom. Every phone call carries a little fear. Every delay in hearing good news feels heavy. Love remains, but confidence grows thinner. A man checks his phone again after another job application is ignored, trying not to read rejection into silence. Bills wait. Time moves. Dignity starts to feel expensive. A woman sits in a car after a difficult doctor's appointment, too numb to cry, staring ahead as though the world has gone quiet all at once. A believer shows up at church, sings the songs, bows the head, and still goes home feeling secretly abandoned. None of these scenes look loud, yet each one carries real suffering. Much of human pain is hidden, polite, and invisible. Some grief learns how to behave in public. Some disappointment becomes so familiar that it stops looking dramatic even while it keeps draining strength. The deepest wounds are often carried by people who still function well enough to keep others from noticing. Heaven, however, is not fooled by outward calm. God sees the tears that never fall in front of anyone. God hears the prayers that no longer sound strong. God remains attentive in moments when even faith feels bruised. Hannah gives this truth a human face. Her sorrow was not small, and it was not brief. Humiliation followed her. Delayed hope wore her down. Year after year, the desire remained alive while the answer did not come. By the time she prayed in the temple, anguish had become so deep that her pain looked strange to those around her. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. To an observer, the moment looked unsettling. To God, it was fully understood. No polished sentence was needed. No performance was required. Grief itself had become the prayer. That is why silence should not be mistaken for absence. Unchanged circumstances do not prove that God has stepped away. Delay does not cancel love. A quiet heaven can still hold an attentive God. Many of the hardest seasons in life begin with the feeling that nothing is happening, while something holy is already taking place beneath the surface. Trust may be thinning, but it is not gone. Prayer may sound weaker, but it is still reaching heaven. Silence is often where faith either dies or deepens. Chapter 2. God's delay does not mean God's rejection. Delay can feel deeply personal. After prayer has been honest, obedience has been real, tears have already fallen, and waiting has stretched far beyond what seemed reasonable, silence starts to feel less like mystery and more like refusal. Human logic reaches a simple conclusion. If God cared, he would act now. If heaven had heard, something would have changed by this point. Once relief does not come on time, disappointment begins turning into interpretation. What first looked confusing starts feeling unfair. What first looked painful starts feeling targeted. In the darker moments, delay can even feel cruel. That reaction is understandable. Urgency lives close to the skin. Pain wants relief now, not later. A troubled heart does not ask for a lesson first. It asks for rescue. A struggling family wants the breakthrough now. A frightened mind wants the answer now. A body in pain wants healing now. Human need moves quickly because suffering makes time feel heavier. One hard week can feel like a year. One unanswered prayer can leave an ache that follows every hour of the day. Under that pressure, delay begins to look like rejection, even when it is not. Something important must be faced here. God's timing is not driven by panic. Purpose governs what urgency cannot understand. A closed door may be protection. A long wait may be preparation. An unanswered request may be part of a larger mercy still hidden from view. None of that feels comforting at first, because pain usually wants explanation only after it receives relief. Even so, truth remains true before it feels comforting. Delay does not automatically mean God has withdrawn favor. Delay may mean the story is being shaped at a deeper level than the present moment can reveal. Mary and Martha lived inside that tension when Lazarus became sick. They did the right thing. Word was sent to Jesus. Love was not absent from that relationship. Need was clear. The emergency was real. Nothing about the situation was vague or misunderstood, yet Jesus still delayed. From the sister's point of view, that delay looked devastating. By the time he arrived, death had already done its work. Grief filled the house. Mourners were present. Confusion had become heartbreak. One sentence from Martha carries the wound of that moment. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." That is not cold theology. That is injured faith speaking honestly. Seen from earth, the delay looked disastrous. Seen from heaven, it became the setting for a greater revelation. Christ had not ignored the cry. Love had not failed. Timing had been serving a purpose larger than immediate intervention. The miracle that followed did more than solve a problem. It revealed glory in a way an earlier answer would not have shown. That does not erase the pain Mary and Martha felt. It does, however, change the meaning of the delay. What looked like neglect was not neglect at all. A practical question rises from that story. What kind of relationship does the soul want with God? One built only on quick solutions will struggle the moment timing becomes difficult. One rooted in trust can survive the tension of waiting. A provider is easy to welcome when the answer comes fast. Lordship is tested when heaven moves slowly. Deep faith is not proved only by praising God after breakthrough. Much is also revealed by staying near Him before it arrives. Rejection says there is no future. Delay says the story is still moving. Chapter 3. The waiting room reveals what success used to hide. Waiting does more than slow life down. It uncovers the parts of the heart that busy seasons keep hidden. When things are moving, doors are opening, work is paying off, and progress is visible. Confidence can look like faith even when it is only comfort, wearing spiritual language. A full schedule creates momentum. Achievement creates reassurance. Productivity creates the feeling that life is under control. In that kind of season, it is easy to believe trust is strong. Then one prayer goes unanswered. One hoped for answer does not come. One important door remains shut. And suddenly, the inner life begins to shake. What looked solid may have been resting on outcomes more than on God. A long wait has a way of revealing this without mercy. Pride shows up first in surprising ways. It says, "I have done the right things. So why is heaven not responding faster?" Hidden beneath that thought is a quiet assumption that obedience should produce quick results, as though effort places God under obligation. Fear follows close behind. While life was predictable, it stayed manageable. Once uncertainty settles in, that calm begins to crack. The mind starts scanning for what might go wrong next. Envy can also enter quietly. Someone else receives the breakthrough. Someone else gets the answer. Someone else steps into the thing long prayed for. And comparison turns another person's blessing into a private wound. Bitterness rarely arrives shouting. It begins with disappointment, then becomes a sharper tone in prayer, a growing coldness in worship, a polite resentment that hardens over time. This is why waiting must never be called wasted time. Refinement often happens there, not because delay itself is pleasant, but because it reveals what comfort once helped disguise. Easy seasons can hide a heart that is still too attached to control, too dependent on visible progress, too fragile when life refuses to cooperate. A soul that looked mature during abundance may discover how reactive, anxious, and self-focused it becomes. When God does not move on schedule, that discovery is painful, but it is also useful. What is exposed can be healed. What is named can be surrendered. What rises in waiting often points to the very place where deeper freedom is needed. Saul and David bring this truth into sharp focus. Saul wanted position quickly and clung to it fearfully. Timing became unbearable to him. Pressure made impatience rise. Image mattered too much. Control mattered too much. Delay exposed an inner instability that success had not cured. David, by contrast, spent long years in obscurity, danger, and uncertainty before the throne ever came into view. Anointing came early. Fulfillment came much later. Caves, threats, betrayal, and displacement became part of the process. Those years were not empty. Character was being built where applause was absent. Strength was being formed where recognition was delayed. One man grabbed for what was not secure within him. The other was prepared through the long discipline of not arriving quickly. Self-examination belongs here. What rises within when nothing moves for months? Irritation, panic, envy, numbness, quiet anger, forced striving. Those reactions reveal more than most people want to admit. Yet they can become the beginning of honesty. Answered prayer often brings gratitude, but unanswered prayer reveals attachment. A waiting season may feel like life has paused. In truth, it may be the moment when the deepest work begins. Chapter 4. Joseph in the pit, the prison, and the long middle. Joseph's story is not powerful because it ends well. Its power comes from how long the middle lasted and how dark that middle became. A dream was given early, but fulfillment did not follow quickly. Before purpose became visible, betrayal arrived first. Brothers turned against him. The pit came before the palace. Innocence shattered in a moment, when family became the source of harm instead of safety. From there, freedom was taken. Slavery replaced belonging. A young man who had once carried signs of favor was suddenly carried into a future he did not choose. Nothing about that path looked like progress. Even when Joseph acted with integrity, suffering did not immediately ease. In Potiphar's house, diligence brought responsibility, yet false accusation overturned it. Doing right did not protect him from being misunderstood. Character did not shield him from injustice. Prison became the next chapter. The story grows heavier there because confinement came not through guilt, but through faithfulness twisted into punishment. At that point, many people would expect God to intervene quickly. Instead, the silence continued. Time kept passing. The man with dreams remained confined. Even service inside prison did not change everything at once. Then came another wound that often cuts deeper than open hostility: forgetfulness. Joseph helped someone and was left behind anyway. That part of the story feels painfully familiar. Many can survive hardship more easily than being overlooked after doing good. Betrayal hurts. False accusation hurts. Being forgotten after serving hurts in a quieter, lonelier way. The long middle of Joseph's life was not one trial. It was one layer after another, each one pressing against the same unresolved question: where is God in all of this? The answer was not visible at first, but it was already forming. Silence was not absence. Hiddenness was not abandonment. God was not only arranging Joseph's future position, something larger was happening within him. The boy with dreams had to become a man who could carry power without arrogance, authority without revenge, and influence without corruption. Quick elevation would not have produced that. The pit stripped illusions. Slavery taught endurance. Prison deepened dependence. Delay matured what early promise had not yet developed. By the time promotion came, inner capacity had been enlarged enough to carry the weight of it. That is why Joseph matters so much to anyone living through a long, confusing chapter. Some people are not simply waiting to be rescued. They are being prepared. Some are not being ignored in the middle. They are being shaped there. A closed season may be building emotional strength, spiritual depth, patience, humility, or wisdom that visible success alone could never teach. The process feels slow because formation usually does. Heaven often works beneath the level of immediate comfort. Modern life has its own pits and prisons. A gifted person is overlooked for years. A faithful worker remains unseen while others move ahead. Someone who chose integrity pays for it with loss. A kind heart gets repaid with misunderstanding. In those seasons, the temptation is to measure everything by what has not happened yet. Joseph's life warns against that conclusion. Meaning can exist long before explanation arrives. The middle chapters often feel the most pointless because they lack resolution, but they may be carrying the deepest preparation of all. What feels like delay may be training. What feels like confinement may be formation. Heaven may be writing its strongest work in the very part of the story that seems hardest to understand. Chapter 5. Patience is not passivity. It is spiritual endurance. Patience is often misunderstood as weakness, as though it means sitting still, feeling nothing, and doing nothing while life slowly sorts itself out. Real patience is far more demanding than that. It has muscle in it. It asks a person to remain steady when disappointment keeps returning, to stay honest without becoming harsh, and to keep moving in the right direction when visible progress is painfully slow. Nothing passive exists in that kind of endurance. A person who rises after another discouraging update, prays again without fresh emotion, refuses a shortcut that would betray conviction, and keeps a soft heart when cynicism would feel easier is not doing less. Strength is being exercised in a hidden form. Ordinary life offers many chances to see this clearly. Another rejection email arrives, yet bitterness is not allowed to settle in. Recovery feels slower than expected, yet one more sober day is still chosen. A damaged marriage does not heal in a week, yet honesty, restraint, and humility continue to be practiced. An aging parent needs care month after month, while gratitude rarely comes back in equal measure. And still love remains present. Patience becomes real when it costs energy, comfort, pride, and the urge to force an outcome. Every moment of quiet faithfulness pushes against the lie that only dramatic action counts as strength. James gives a simple image that carries deep wisdom. A farmer plants, then waits. Soil is worked. Seed is placed. Time passes. Weather remains uncontrollable. Growth stays invisible for a while. No wise farmer digs the ground up the next morning to see whether the seed has begun to move. Trust must live beside labor. Repetition must continue without constant proof. Seasons cannot be hurried by anxiety. Rain cannot be commanded by panic. That picture matters because it pulls patience out of abstraction and puts it into the world of dirt, weather, sweat, uncertainty, and repeated effort. Growth is often slow, hidden, and beyond immediate control. Yet none of that makes the work meaningless. Spiritual endurance works the same way. Prayer is offered, then offered again. Character is guarded, then guarded again. Temptation returns, and the answer remains no. Hope grows tired, yet it is not fully abandoned. A slower process than expected does not mean a dead process. Hidden roots may be strengthening beneath a surface that still looks unchanged. Most of life's deepest formations happen there. Resilience develops when immediate results are absent. Persistence matures when applause is missing. Faith becomes less emotional and more durable when it learns how to stand without constant encouragement. A recovering addict illustrates this beautifully. Restoration may not arrive as one dramatic victory. Some days feel strong, others feel fragile. Shame may whisper that progress is too small to matter. Even so, one more honest conversation, one more refusal, one more act of accountability, one more day lived in the light becomes its own kind of triumph. Patience in that setting is not delay without purpose. It is disciplined endurance under pressure. A caregiver offers another example. Love keeps showing up in quiet forms, even while exhaustion grows and visible reward stays minimal. Such a life may look ordinary from a distance, yet heaven sees the greatness hidden inside sustained faithfulness. This is why patience must be honored, not pitied. Beneath its calm surface lies restraint, resilience, and courage. Waiting with trust is hard work. Continuing without collapse is holy work. Holding a gentle spirit while life remains unresolved is mature strength. Patience is not inactivity. Patience is restrained strength that refuses to quit before the season has finished its work. Chapter 6. Abraham and Sarah, or the pain of a promise that grows old. Some forms of waiting hurt because they are intense. Others hurt because they last so long that hope itself begins to age. Abraham and Sarah lived inside that second kind of pain. The wound was not only delay, years kept passing while the promise remained unfulfilled. And time itself began to feel like an argument against what God had said. Early expectation can survive a short delay with energy still intact. Long postponement changes the atmosphere. What once felt possible starts to feel fragile. What once sounded clear begins to echo strangely in a quieter heart. With every passing season, the question grows sharper. What happens when the promise remains, but the window seems to be closing? That is where this story becomes deeply human. Aging hope carries a different sadness from urgent need. Desperation can cry loudly. Disappointed hope often goes silent. Prayer grows shorter. Expectation lowers itself for self-protection. A soul may stop asking deeply, not because desire has vanished, but because repeated disappointment has taught the heart to brace for pain. This is one of the great hidden dangers of delay. Open rebellion is not always the first threat. Quiet, emotional retreat is often more common. Nothing dramatic happens on the surface. Inside, however, confidence slowly pulls back from full trust. Abraham and Sarah knew what it meant to live under a word from God while circumstances kept pushing in the opposite direction. Bodies aged. Years moved on. Possibility seemed to weaken rather than increase. Human calculation could only reach one conclusion: too late. The promise, however, remained untouched by the visible evidence. That tension is where faith was tested most sharply. Not in the moment of first hearing, but in the long stretch afterward, when ordinary time kept contradicting divine assurance. Delay also introduced moral complexity. Once waiting becomes painful enough, the temptation to manufacture fulfillment begins to look reasonable. Anxious hearts do not always abandon the promise completely. More often, they try to help it arrive. That is where Ishmael enters the story. Human effort stepped in where trust had grown strained. A solution was created, but it was not the promised one. Panic often produces substitutes that seem practical in the short term and costly in the long term. Many lives still repeat that pattern. A rushed relationship is formed because loneliness has gone on too long. A compromise is made because provision feels overdue. A lesser path is chosen because the right one seems delayed beyond endurance. Ishmael's solutions appear whenever human urgency tries to solve what only divine timing can fulfill. Even so, failure did not erase the promise. Human weakness complicated the story, but it did not cancel God's intention. That truth matters deeply. Delay may expose fear, It may even expose missteps. None of that means heaven has lost control. Fulfillment still came, not because the situation looked possible, but because the one who spoke remained faithful. Isaac arrived in God's time, not in human panic, not in emotional pressure, and not in response to fading probability. Many hearts know this struggle well. A person waits so long for healing, direction, reconciliation, or provision that hope begins to feel old inside the chest. Prayer loses some of its fire. Imagination starts shrinking. Desire remains, yet expectation becomes cautious. In that place, Abraham and Sarah stand as a reminder that divine timing is not hurried by panic and not cancelled by human impossibility. What God intends does not expire simply because the clock keeps moving. Chapter 7. When anxiety moves into the future. Anxiety rarely stays in the present. It pulls the mind forward, away from what is actually happening, and into what might happen next. The body may be sitting at a desk, driving home, washing dishes, or lying in bed, yet thought has already left the room. It starts building tomorrow before tomorrow arrives. One possibility turns into 5. A concern becomes a scene. A scene becomes a disaster. Soon the mind is no longer responding to reality. It is reacting to predictions it created on its own. That is why anxiety feels so exhausting. Energy gets spent on events that have not happened, may never happen, and cannot be solved in the current moment. This inner pattern can look responsible on the surface. Preparation sounds wise. Planning sounds mature. Care sounds loving. Anxiety often hides inside those words and says, "I am only trying to stay ahead. I am only trying to protect myself. I am only trying to be ready." Yet, much of the time, something else is happening beneath that language. The heart is trying to control a future no human being can govern. Thought keeps circling because uncertainty feels intolerable. The mind writes scripts for conversations that may never occur. It rehearses failure before any attempt has been made. It imagines loss with a kind of dark creativity. Peace disappears, not because the future has arrived, but because imagination has already moved there without God. Peter's moment on the water captures this struggle with unusual clarity. At first, attention stayed where it needed to stay. Movement was possible because focus was rightly placed. Then the waves became louder in awareness than the voice that called him forward. Once that shift happened, fear rose quickly. Water had not changed its nature in that instant. Wind had not suddenly appeared for the first time. What changed was focus. The mind moved from trust to threat, from presence to danger, from the one holding the moment to the forces surrounding it. That is how anxiety often works. Fear becomes stronger than the call the moment the soul gives the future more attention than God. Much suffering begins there. A person awaiting medical results starts living emotionally inside a diagnosis not yet confirmed. Someone facing financial pressure begins imagining total ruin instead of the next faithful step. A parent thinks years ahead with dread and forgets the grace available for today. None of this means concern is wrong. Concern can be honest and necessary. Trouble begins when concern stops being a signal and becomes a mental habitat. Anxiety then drains strength that was meant for the present. Freedom does not come by pretending the future is harmless. Wisdom still plans. Love still prepares. Responsibility still acts. Peace returns, however, when the mind stops bowing to possibilities it cannot control and returns to the place where grace is actually available now. Trust lives in the present. Obedience happens in the present. Prayer rises in the present. God gives daily bread, not imaginary stockpiles for fears that have not arrived. A fearful imagination can make a person suffer many times before one actual sorrow arrives. Chapter 8. Stillness is an act of war against panic. Stillness sounds gentle, but it is often one of the hardest spiritual acts a person can choose. Nothing weak exists in it. Stillness is not decorative, calm, soft mood, or passive withdrawal from reality. It is resistance against inner chaos. It is the refusal to let panic rule thought, pace, and decision. In a noisy world, stillness becomes a form of courage because it cuts against the restless instinct to react to everything at once. That is exactly why many people avoid it. Noise creates the illusion of control. Constant scrolling makes it feel as though staying updated will keep life manageable. Constant talking creates the feeling that enough words will reduce fear. Constant planning creates the impression that one more strategy will remove uncertainty. Constant reacting gives the nervous system something to do, which can feel safer than stopping. Stillness threatens all of that. Once distraction is removed, the soul must face what it has been trying not to feel. Fear becomes easier to hear. Grief becomes harder to outrun. Unanswered questions stop staying buried. For that reason, silence can feel dangerous before it becomes healing. Elijah shows how necessary this is. After public victory came private collapse. Strength drained out. Fear rushed in. Exhaustion darkened perception. The man who had stood boldly soon wanted to run and hide. God met him there, not only through dramatic acts, but through holy quiet. That detail matters. A shattered inner world is not always healed by more intensity. Sometimes the soul needs gentleness, presence, and stillness more than spectacle. Panic demands motion. God often restores through quiet. Real stillness has practical shape. Scripture can be opened before messages are checked. Prayer can become listening instead of non-stop talking. A rushed decision can be delayed long enough for fear to lose control of it. A few moments of silence can be guarded in the morning before the world starts making demands. None of these actions look dramatic, yet each one weakens the grip of panic. Stillness retrains attention. It teaches the mind that not every thought deserves obedience. It reminds the heart that God remains God without human scrambling. Peace usually does not enter a frantic life by accident. Room must be made for it. Quiet must be chosen. Breath must slow. Thought must come back from its wild running. In that space, fear does not always disappear at once, but it begins to lose authority. Stillness is where the soul stops feeding panic and starts remembering who is in control. Chapter 9. Surrender is where inner war begins to end. Surrender is painful because it asks for release before certainty arrives. The heart wants proof first. It wants the map before the journey, the outcome before obedience, the guarantee before trust. That desire feels reasonable. After all, risk feels less threatening when everything can be measured, predicted, and managed. Yet most of life refuses to work that way. There comes a point when no amount of planning can remove uncertainty. At that point, inner war begins to intensify. Thought keeps circling. Emotion keeps tightening. Control becomes an obsession. Peace slips farther away. Real surrender begins there. Not in passivity, not in indifference, and not in emotional numbness. It begins where a person finally stops trying to be master over what only God can hold. Such surrender has texture. It feels like saying yes to obedience without seeing the whole road. It feels like handing over a timeline that matters deeply. It feels like admitting that understanding is limited and that God is still trustworthy beyond that limit. Something inside resists this because control feels safer than trust. The mind clings to the belief that one more plan, one more calculation, or one more attempt to manage outcomes will finally calm the soul. Instead, strain grows heavier. Gethsemane gives surrender its truest human depth. Nothing casual existed in that moment. Tears, anguish, and trembling were present. Desire was fully honest. The cup was not welcomed with lightness. Pain was not denied. Grief was not hidden. Even so, the final movement of that prayer turned toward the Father's will. That is why Gethsemane matters so much. Surrender is not emotional ease. It is costly alignment. The most important yes in history was spoken through pressure so intense that it carried the full weight of suffering. No shallow version of trust can stand next to that scene. A surrendered life may still shake, it may still ache, it may still ask boldly for another way. Yet somewhere beneath those honest emotions, authority changes hands. That distinction matters. Surrender does not kill desire. A believer can still ask, still long, still grieve, and still hope. Nothing in mature faith requires pretending pain does not hurt. Honest prayer has room for tears. Honest love has room for longing. Honest faith has room for deep disappointment. What surrender changes is not the existence of desire, but its place in the soul. Desire stops sitting on the throne. God remains God. Even when the preferred outcome does not arrive on command, inner war begins to weaken when this happens. Pressure may still exist around the person, but its power inside the person starts to loosen. A timeline no longer has to be forced. An answer no longer has to be manufactured. A fearful mind no longer has to run the whole future. Control promises safety and delivers strain. Surrender looks frightening at first, but often becomes the doorway to peace. Chapter 10. Peace does not come from getting answers to everything. Peace is often chased in the wrong places. Many assume calm will arrive once enough uncertainty disappears, once enough questions are resolved, or once enough of life becomes predictable. Financial certainty is expected to produce rest. Relational certainty is expected to remove fear. Medical certainty is expected to quiet the mind. Emotional certainty is expected to steady the heart. Spiritual certainty is expected to settle every doubt. Yet, life rarely offers complete security in all directions at once. Even when one area becomes stable, another can begin to shake. If peace depends on total control, peace remains permanently out of reach. That false chase explains why so many capable people still live unrested lives. Answers are gathered, plans are built, systems are improved, and still the soul stays tense. Not because wisdom is wrong, but because wisdom was asked to do something only trust can do. Information can clarify. Planning can help. Careful action can reduce avoidable trouble. None of those things can create deep peace on their own. A human heart was never designed to rest in perfect management of circumstances. Too many variables remain outside control. Too many outcomes stay hidden. Too much of life must still be received, not mastered. The disciples in the storm reveal this beautifully. Waves were real. Wind was real. Danger was real. None of that should be minimized. Panic, however, rose to its greatest height when their sense of control collapsed. The storm outside was serious, but the storm inside became even more decisive. Christ was present in the boat, yet fear interpreted the moment through what the senses could measure. Water became louder than presence. Threat became more convincing than trust. That story matters because many lives still follow the same pattern. External trouble is one thing. Internal surrender to fear is another. Pastoral wisdom begins here. Peace does not require pretending that storms are small. It requires remembering that God is greater than the storm and present within it. Such peace is not a reward given after every question has been answered. It is the fruit of bringing anxieties to God before answers are complete. It grows when the soul stops demanding clarity on every point. Before agreeing to rest, it deepens when control is no longer treated as the source of safety. This changes daily life in practical ways. A person can move forward without solving the whole future. Prayer can replace mental overhandling. A troubling diagnosis can be faced without surrendering the inner world to terror. Financial pressure can be managed wisely without letting money become the ruler of emotional stability. Relational tension can be carried honestly, without assuming uncertainty means disaster. None of this removes difficulty. It changes where the weight is placed. Peace is not found by solving life like a puzzle. Peace is found by resting in God while parts of the picture are still unfinished. Answers have value, but they are not the foundation of the soul. Trust is. Peace is not the reward for solving life. Peace is the fruit of trusting God inside life's unsolved places. Chapter 11. God is rebuilding more than the reader first asked for. Many prayers begin small, not because they are insincere, but because pain usually asks for relief before it asks for transformation. A struggling heart wants the pressure to stop. A weary mind wants clarity. A wounded life wants one broken area repaired so normal living can resume. That desire is understandable. Yet God often answers at a deeper level than the first request. A person may ask for one repaired corner, while heaven intends to rebuild the whole house. That is where confusion begins, because reconstruction rarely feels gentle at the start. Renovation is disruptive. Walls are opened. Dust fills the air. Familiar rooms become unusable. Noise replaces comfort. What once looked stable is torn into pieces before anything beautiful appears in its place. In spiritual life, the same pattern often unfolds. Someone prays for relief from anxiety, and God begins exposing deeper habits of control. Someone asks for strength, and hidden fears come into view. Someone pleads for peace in one area, and old foundations are disturbed because they were never strong enough to carry the future God intends to give. From the inside, that process can feel violent when it is misunderstood. It may look as though life is getting worse when in truth, the old structure is being removed. That is why the image of God rebuilding a house matters so much. A soul may want a few surface repairs. Heaven may be thinking about expansion, strengthening, and redesign. Small expectations often meet a larger mercy than they first imagined. What feels like interruption may actually be reconstruction. What feels like loss of control may be the beginning of truer freedom. Spiritual growth is rarely a matter of adding one polished virtue on top of an unchanged life. More often, it involves deeper change. Old pride must come down. False identity must be stripped away. Fear-driven habits must be exposed. Something new requires space, and space often appears only after something old has been broken open. Real life makes this easier to see. A person prays for a new job because the old one ended painfully. At first, the request seems simple. Lord, open a better door. Along the way, however, a deeper work begins. Identity had been tied too closely to status. Confidence had depended too heavily on performance. Worth had been measured by position. The delayed answer becomes a workshop for humility, courage, and a quieter sense of self, no longer dependent on title. Another person prays for a relationship to be restored. The longing is sincere, yet if that restoration came too quickly, old wounds, bad patterns, and unresolved insecurity might damage it again. Instead of offering instant repair, God begins healing the places that made love unstable in the first place. The answer looks slower because the work is larger. This changes the meaning of hardship. Pain is no longer seen only as something to survive. It can become part of a holy reconstruction. Not every broken season means life is collapsing. Some seasons are breaking open because something stronger, wiser, and more beautiful is being formed underneath. Relief may still come, but transformation is often the greater gift. God is not only trying to fix one problem, He may be rebuilding the person who brought the prayer. Chapter 12. Do not take the wheel in the middle of the storm. Long waiting creates pressure, and pressure creates temptation. Once fear grows heavy enough, the urge to take control can begin to feel not only reasonable, but necessary. That is how many costly mistakes are born, not through open rebellion, but through panic. A person grows tired of uncertainty, tired of praying, tired of not knowing, and starts reaching for whatever seems fastest, most practical, or most immediately relieving. The storm does not have to disappear before damage is done. It only needs to convince the heart that God is moving too slowly to be trusted. That danger appears in many ordinary forms. A lonely person forces a relationship that should have been left alone because silence has become too painful to bear. A desperate person compromises ethics for money because pressure has made obedience look unrealistic. A wounded person retaliates because waiting for justice feels weaker than striking back. A frightened person stops praying and begins manipulating circumstances because anxiety now seems more useful than faith. None of these choices usually arrive with dramatic warning signs. Most look practical in the moment. Some even appear responsible. That is what makes them dangerous. Saul's unlawful sacrifice shows how easily impatience can wear the clothing of urgency. Pressure was real. The situation looked unstable. Delay felt threatening. Samuel had not arrived when expected, and the fear of losing control began to rise. Saul acted, not because he openly rejected God, but because he could not tolerate waiting any longer. The move looked decisive. It even looked religious on the surface. Yet impatience had crossed into disobedience. Trust was replaced with self-management. The issue was never only the sacrifice. The deeper issue was the refusal to remain under God's timing when tension became severe. That pattern remains painfully relevant. Fear often presents self-rescue as wisdom. It says, "Do something now or everything will collapse." Take matters into your own hands because waiting is too risky. Push harder. Force the door. Make the outcome happen. Underneath all of that is the belief that delay is more dangerous than disobedience. That belief is false. Yet under pressure, it can feel persuasive. A storm makes quick control look attractive because surrender seems exposed and slow. Strong faith is not measured only by bold action. Sometimes it is measured by refusing the wrong action when urgency is screaming for movement. Not every open option is a faithful one. Not every quick solution is a wise one. Not every emotionally satisfying response is safe for the soul. Waiting can feel helpless, but panic-driven control often creates complications that would never have existed otherwise. Peace leaves, trust weakens. The original pain is then joined by unnecessary consequences. This chapter asks for uncomfortable honesty. Some of the worst mistakes in life are not made because God was hated. They are made because He seemed too slow. When fear becomes the driver, Wisdom is usually left behind. Better to remain in the storm with integrity than to seize the wheel and wreck what patience was trying to preserve. Chapter 13. Suffering can either shrink a soul or enlarge it. Suffering does not automatically make a person wiser. That assumption sounds comforting, but it is not always true. Pain can deepen compassion, humility, and trust, yet it can also sharpen resentment, self-pity, and hardness. A wounded life does not become beautiful by accident. Pressure reveals direction. It shows whether the soul is bending toward grace or curling inward around its own hurt. That is why suffering carries moral seriousness. Something is being formed in it, but the outcome is not neutral. Two people can pass through hardship and come out profoundly different. One becomes suspicious of all goodness. Disappointment turns into a permanent lens. Kindness feels unsafe. Hope starts looking foolish. Prayer grows thin. Gratitude feels dishonest. A closed posture begins to rule the inner world. Another person walks through deep pain and becomes more tender toward the wounded. Dependence on grace grows stronger. Pride weakens. Compassion becomes more instinctive. Suffering still hurts, but it no longer sits on the throne. That difference matters. Pain itself is not the only factor. Response shapes outcome. Bitterness often begins in small, respectable forms. Life feels unfair. Another person seems untouched while one burden keeps dragging on. A question remains unanswered too long. A wound returns in memory too often. Gradually, sorrow stops being sorrow alone and begins becoming an identity. That is where suffering starts shrinking the soul. Vision narrows. Joy feels suspicious. Other people's blessings become painful to witness. The heart protects itself by hardening. Such hardening may feel like strength, but it is really a loss of openness. A surrendered response moves in another direction. Tears are still real. Confusion still hurts. Nothing about mature faith requires pretending that pain is light. Even so, trust keeps a deeper door open. Grace is still sought. God is still approached. The wound is not worshipped. In that posture, suffering can enlarge a life. Endurance becomes more than survival. Character is shaped. Hope is purified. Love becomes less sentimental and more costly. A person begins seeing others with gentler eyes because sorrow has removed arrogance. Joni Eareckson Tada gives this chapter a living face. A diving accident left her quadriplegic, and the years that followed did not become a story of shallow positivity or easy answers. Her witness carried something stronger: dependence on Christ, perseverance through long limitation, and ministry born from real pain. That kind of life shows what enlarged suffering can look like. Not denial, not polished inspiration, something steadier. A soul made deeper by hardship rather than reduced by it. Every painful season asks a quiet question. Will this wound close the heart or deepen it? Will suffering become a wall or a doorway? No automatic answer exists. Pain can teach, but only when bitterness does not take over the classroom. Suffering does not come as a teacher everyone automatically learns from. It teaches most deeply where surrender remains possible. Chapter 14. Quiet faith is often greater than public miracles. Not every testimony ends with dramatic reversal. Some lives never receive the kind of visible breakthrough that people quickly recognize and celebrate. Healing may not arrive in an instant. A broken relationship may not be restored in the hoped-for way. Financial strain may not disappear overnight. Even so, holiness can still grow there. Some of the most beautiful victories in spiritual life happen without spectacle, without applause, and without a story the world would call impressive. A marriage remains difficult, Yet the old cycle of retaliation begins to die. Harsh words no longer receive harsh words back. A wounded heart learns restraint. Pride gives way to humility. That quiet change may never become public testimony. Yet heaven sees its beauty. Illness stays in the body, but fear no longer rules the mind with the same authority. Pain remains real, though panic does not sit where trust now stands. A long prayed for answer still has not appeared, yet worship survives. That kind of faith has weight. It loves God without demanding a dramatic ending before remaining loyal. This matters because endurance is often undervalued. Loud miracles are easy to admire. Quiet faithfulness is easier to overlook. Yet much of spiritual maturity is built in hidden places. The widow who kept coming before the unjust judge did not carry glamour. Persistence defined her. Need remained, delay remained. She kept showing up anyway. That image gives dignity to the kind of faith that refuses to disappear simply because life is difficult. The bleeding woman carries a similar kind of beauty. Years of disappointment had passed. Public strength was not her story. Persistent reaching was. A frail body still moved toward hope. Such examples protect the soul from a shallow understanding of blessing. Not every gift from God arrives as instant change in circumstances. Sometimes the greater gift is endurance that does not collapse, worship that survives disappointment, gentleness that remains under pressure, or peace that grows in an unresolved life. Those things may look small from a distance, but they are not small at all. They are signs of deep grace at work, where no crowd may ever notice. A culture that celebrates only visible outcomes can make hidden obedience feel insignificant. That is a serious mistake. Heaven measures differently. Silent perseverance matters. Returning to prayer after another hard day matters. Choosing trust without evidence of quick change matters. Refusing bitterness matters. Continuing to love God while the story remains unfinished matters greatly. Not every victory looks loud. Some of the holiest ones happen behind closed doors, inside tired hearts, in rooms where no miracle has yet become public. But faith still refuses to die. Quiet faith is often greater than public miracles because it proves that God is worthy even before visible rescue arrives. Chapter 15. The answer may be different, deeper, and better than expected. Many prayers begin with one simple request. Fix this, remove this, open that, change them, change me. Bring relief quickly. Such prayers are honest, and honesty matters. Pain naturally asks for escape before it asks for understanding. A wounded heart wants the pressure lifted. A weary mind wants the struggle to end. Yet God's faithfulness is not limited to giving the exact form of answer first imagined. Very often, heaven responds at a deeper level than the request itself. The answer may not be a simple yes in the shape originally desired. Sometimes it arrives as deeper healing instead of quick relief. Sometimes it comes as strength to endure rather than immediate escape. Sometimes the greater miracle is not an altered situation, but a transformed person standing inside the same situation with new peace, new clarity, and new depth. That truth protects faith from becoming shallow. Without it, prayer can slowly turn transactional. God is expected to solve, remove, deliver, and restore on demand. Once that does not happen in the preferred way, disappointment starts rewriting the meaning of divine love. A stronger view is needed. God can be fully faithful even when the answer does not match the first desire. Love does not disappear when timing changes. Mercy does not fail when the form of help looks different. Wisdom may be at work precisely where human expectation feels interrupted. Paul's thorn shows this with unusual force. He did not bring a casual request before God. He pleaded for removal. Relief was sought directly and repeatedly. The answer did not come in the form first wanted. The thorn remained, yet grace was given in a way that revealed something greater than simple escape. Strength met weakness. Power rested where limitation remained. Faithfulness showed itself not through immediate deliverance, but through sustaining presence. That story matters because it prevents false promises. Not every burden vanishes. Not every prayer ends with removal. Even so, God remains near, active, and generous. Grace can hold what relief has not yet taken away. This changes the direction of the soul. A person may begin the journey asking, "Lord, fix this." That prayer is not wrong. Along the way, however, something deeper can emerge. "Lord, form me through this. Teach me here. Purify what suffering has exposed. Build what comfort never could. Make me wiser, steadier, gentler, and freer." That shift does not mean pain has become pleasant. It means trust has become larger than the first request. Hope no longer depends only on changed circumstances. Hope begins resting in the certainty that God is working behind the scenes, carrying the weary, shaping the hidden life, and preparing a future marked by meaning, hope, and joy. Often the answer is different because it is deeper. Often it is deeper because it is better. What first looked like delay may become formation. What first felt like denial may become protection. What first seemed like silence may have been holy work unfolding out of sight. In the end, the truest miracle may not simply be the changed situation, but the changed soul. Pain is real. Waiting is hard. Silence can feel heavy enough to bend the heart. Faith does tremble. None of that means God is absent. Across every chapter, one truth has remained steady. God sees the wound, hears the cry, governs the timing, shapes the soul, and turns delayed seasons into holy preparation. What looks empty is not empty. What feels wasted is not wasted. This message does not promise an easy life. It offers something deeper and more durable. Keep praying when no answer appears. Keep trusting when understanding fails. Keep surrendering when control feels safer. Keep becoming still long enough to remember who God is. His hand may seem slow, but it is never careless. His silence may feel painful, but it is never empty. His timing may stretch the heart, but it never slips from wisdom. One final hope should remain after these pages close. No tear has been ignored. No weary prayer has been lost. No hidden season has been meaningless. God is still working, still holding, still forming, still leading. Leave it in God's hands, not because the road is easy, but because His care is deeper than fear, and His purpose is greater than what can be seen right now.